here. If you're wondering what the silly picture of me is that was me and a colleague. We started a podcast on how we can apply sports psychology to environments that are not sports. So we spoke to things like musicians, we spoke to medical doctors, we spoke to mountain rescue doctors, that sort of thing. And we were interested in finding out how they manage the psychological requirements of their work. And we'll be releasing that on our website, as Alison has already said, flow-states.com. And it's great to see on the chat box here, we've already got a bunch of people calling in from different places. Alison, would you maybe be able to read me some highlights of who's joining us and what the sports are?
We've got Jeff Perry from Prince Edward Island. He's basketball. Glenna Ingram from Antigonish, Nova Scotia. She's with baseball. Lauren from Dartmouth and swimming. Natasha from Dartmouth, snowboard and any sport she can. Sierra from Porters Lake, track and field. We've got Anna, soccer from Coldbrook. Max from Red Deer, Alberta, athletics. Jennifer from Bridgewater, she does Special Olympics, curling, bocce, and para hockey and kayaking, and Jen does just about everything.
Wonderful.
We've got equestrian, rugby, volleyball, Nordic sports. It goes on.
Amazing.
Yeah.
That's great to see such a great audience. Thank you, everyone. So now that you're also warmed up with the chat box, what I would like to say is, if at any point in the session you have a question or a reflection, feel free to, if you want to, you can just jump on the microphone and interrupt me and ask a question, or feel free to just jump on the chat box and post a question in there. Alison will be monitoring the chat box so that we can interact with you that way. But yes, so with that in mind, let's get going. I'm imagining that we'll go through the content in about 40 minutes, 45 minutes, and with some time for Q&A at the end. So without further ado, tonight's session is called 3 Quick and Easy Coaching Strategies, although thanks to Alison's advice, I decided the original title was 3 Quick and Easy Coaching Heuristics, and to not scare people away, we decided to change that to 3 Quick and Easy Coaching Strategies. But going back to the original title, why focus on coaching strategies? Why focus on coaching heuristics? So as a sports psychologist, I believe and know that the different theory and evidence-based strategies that we use in sport and in coaching and in psychology, it can have a demonstrable impact on what you guys do as coaches. But I've also noticed and experienced that it can sometimes be complex and a little bit abstract to implement. And so as I've gone through the years with my practice and my academic work, I've really gravitated towards heuristics. So a heuristic is like is a versatile problem-solving framework that basically invites us to think a little bit differently about a situation, essentially offering us a new lens to solve a problem with or to look at our coaching practice with. And if this kind of thing resonates with you, I've actually put a screenshot on the slide there of what I think is a brilliant book that I have absolutely no connection or endorsement with, genuinely. It was written by 2 UK-based sports psychologists who worked with the English Institute of Sport and Manchester United Football Club, called Pig Wrestling. And essentially, this is also a book containing a heuristic, very relevant if you work with people and you're looking to basically approach human-related problems and challenges that you will definitely encounter in coaching. But with that being said, I believe good psychology, practical psychology, should simplify things. And therefore, what we're going to be focusing on tonight is metaphors, stories, mnemonics, and absurd imagery, partly because they're fun and because they are memorable. And those are the things that I think will stick in your mind when you are doing your coaching practice as well. So with that in mind, we have 3 quick and easy coaching strategies. These are 3 practical evidence-based heuristics, which can be flexibly applied to elevate your coaching. And the 3 areas I'm hoping to cover with you are developing mental flexibility and focus, understanding and leveraging the stress response, and providing more tactful support to promote psychological safety. So with that being said, by the end of the session, you will understand what these 3 practical and evidence-based heuristics are and mean. So we've got WTF, Halt the Gremlin, and the support manifest. So I will go through each of these, and yes, that by the end of the session, you will hopefully have an understanding of what they mean and how they can apply to your coaching practice. So you might have already noticed that the way that these are phrased, they're a little bit silly and they're deliberately memorable from that point of view. So let's get started. What I will say here is all of these things are based on research, whether it's my own research or that of other psychologists and practitioners. I will go over some of the theory and the research that underpins these heuristics, but I am mostly going to focus on the practical, playful components behind them. If you want me to elaborate on the science and the theory behind it, I'm happy to do so, but I'm really more interested in conveying the practical side of it to you so that you can have a think about how could you maybe use these concepts in your coaching practice. It might be that you like all three. It might be that actually maybe there's just one or two of the concepts that really resonate with you. But I'm really keen to hear your reflections and ideas as we progress through, and particularly at the end. So let's start with the first one. How can we develop mental flexibility and focus as coaches? Now, I think depending on who you ask, mental flexibility and focus will mean different things. To me, mental flexibility is really all about maintaining focus on the most important task at hand that's right in front of you, not getting hooked with distracting thoughts and feelings that ultimately result in you investing your attention into something that's not really going to help you moving forward. I'm sure we can all relate to that from the point of view of an athlete who might be panicking because they're in a new situation they've not been in before, and therefore they get a little bit fused and hooked with that sense of anxiety, rather than focusing on what it is they need to do next. Or maybe even ourselves as coaches, we might get sometimes a little bit preoccupied with what do we say next? Are we doing a good enough job? That sort of thing, rather than focusing on what is the most helpful thing that we need to be prioritizing right now. So WTF is a nice heuristic that I think can help to gain some mental flexibility and to focus back on the most important tasks at hand. It's a very versatile framework and can be used in different ways. So let's go through it so that we can see how it applies to your coaching practice. So WTF, of course, WTF stands for what's the function? So this is a key question that I think if you ask it to yourself when you're coaching can reveal quite a lot of the thought processes that underpin why an athlete is behaving the way they are, or even why you as a coach might sometimes be behaving in a way in a coaching scenario that is perhaps not the way you want to be acting in a certain coaching situation, whether that is when you're stressed or whether you're in a unique, challenging type of situation. So let's go through some examples of what this looks like. I'll explain the psychology underpinning it really briefly. So essentially, some of you might have heard of some of the neuropsychology of why our brains operate the way they do. But as a very simplified and brief background, we've got different compartments of the brain, if you like, and some parts of the brain are much older and they're located in different parts compared to the other parts of the brain. So all living mammals, most creatures have got what we call a reptilian brain, and this is the part of the brain that sits very deep in the head, closest to the brainstem, and it's essentially responsible for regulating very basic bodily functions like breathing, heart rate, hormonal release, that sort of thing. It's usually the part of the brain that wins in a race if it needs to get information to the body very quickly, partly because of how closely located it is to the spinal cord, that sort of thing. We then have the limbic brain, which evolved a little bit later in animals. And this is essentially the part of the brain that's responsible for the fight or flight response. It's often nicknamed the danger detector. And then we finally have the neocortex, the rational brain, which is the part that evolved the latest, last. And this is the rational part of the brain that contains all the aspects that make you, make you human. All of your coaching knowledge sits in the neocortex. Unfortunately, what this means for us is when there is an information race between these three brains, the new brain, the rational brain, almost always loses, partly because of where it's located. And we have to usually, in the first instance, deal with the limbic brain and the reptilian brain's response. So with that being said, in the world of cavemen and saber-toothed tigers, that's quite useful, because if we have a caveman who approaches a rustling bush and a saber-toothed tiger jumps out, they have a fear response. They might say to themselves, I'm such an idiot, now I'm feeling nervous and emotional, I need to avoid this in future, which is a pretty useful response. If you're a caveman, you're trying not to get eaten. However, our brains haven't changed that much in recent years, and we have the same response in sport-related situations where if we underperform or if we're in a new, novel sport-related situation with people we don't know, we often have a very similar reaction. And it's really basically there to keep us safe at the end of the day. So we have this danger detector. Your limbic system evolved to give you a range of different internal sensations, some of which are uncomfortable. I'm sure most of you can relate to that, having done sport yourself, or whether you've coached an athlete and you see someone who's new to a team, they might be a little bit nervous or anxious when they come into that environment, or whether they're going to a new event, whether it's an event where the demands that are placed on them are quite taxing. They might have this uncomfortable reaction initially. And this really helps to motivate what we expose ourselves to and what we avoid. Some psychologists call this appetitive and aversive operant conditioning. Now, I'm not going to go into detail what this is, but the key thing here is we instinctively prioritize the control, elimination, or avoidance of short-term discomforts, because that's what keeps us alive. It's what keeps us happy in the short term. But we don't often realize the long-term consequences of this. So WTF, how can we put this to use? What I want you guys to think of here is that when we see either ourselves as coaches or our athletes behaving in a particular way, it is a little bit like an iceberg. Obviously, with an iceberg, you tend to see the part on the top above the water that's exposed. And so let's look at that from a behavioral point of view. We might see an athlete, let's say they're a cyclist, they're pulling the brakes, or they're a different kind of athlete, they're performing conservatively, or they're avoiding a situation that they find anxiety provoking, for example. And then let's also look at it from the point of view of a coach. We might see a coach in a coaching situation not saying anything. So if we look at this under the surface, what is it that might be going on for these individuals? The athlete might feel stiff and fearful about making a mistake. The coach might be worried about saying the wrong thing. So for anyone who's feeling brave, feel free to jump on the microphone here, but WTF, what do you think the function is of this behavior that we see above the surface?
Is it a reaction to their uncomfortableness, for lack of a better word?
Yeah, I fully agree. What are they doing in this reaction? Like, what function is this reaction serving?
Survival.
Yeah, surviving, exactly. And I would say that in the short term, it's helping them to eliminate or avoid that discomfort, right? We've got the coach who's worried about saying the wrong thing in a coaching scenario. In the short term, if you say nothing, actually, you're probably avoiding that discomfort for the next 5 to 10 seconds by just not saying anything, because then you won't say the wrong thing, right? Equally, we have an athlete who feels stiff and fearful about making a mistake. So if they actually perform more conservatively, or they don't put themselves into that performance situation, by, I don't know, running into the attack scenario, if it's a pitch-based sport, or avoiding a bike race altogether that makes them nervous. In the short term, does it eliminate the discomfort? Yeah, sure, it does do that. What are some of the longer term consequences of this, though? Any ideas? Feel free to type them into the chat box as well.
You could have players that don't develop to their potential.
Yeah, exactly that. I heard another voice there. Any other ideas?
Yeah, that was me. I guess for the coaches, not being able to get feedback on the way that they're coaching by avoiding discussing anything.
Yes, exactly. And I think there's a whole range of different long-term costs that come with this, short-term avoidance of discomfort, basically. And sometimes that can get quite deep for us, right? In the sense that, like, well, sure, it does work. We can avoid these discomforts. We can try and eliminate them. In the short term, that does work. But in the long term, we're not really stretching ourselves. We're not really becoming the kind of performers or the kind of coaches we want to be. So WTF is a useful question to ask yourself. You can ask it to yourself as a coach if you're maybe noticing that your coaching behaviors are not aligning in the way that you really want to coach. Or you could also look at it from an athlete-centered point of view and just ask yourself this very simple question: WTF, am I, or is the athlete that I'm coaching trying to avoid, control, or eliminate something in the short term at the expense of doing something more valuable? Okay. So, I'm not going to lie, before tonight started, I was like, oh, I've never delivered a workshop to the Canadian Sport Institute and all of you wonderful coaches. So there was a little bit of a fear response for me. And yes, I absolutely could have avoided delivering this workshop and just, you know, gone in the subway or something. In the short term, that would have helped me to avoid the discomfort. But yes, that would have been at the expense of doing something more valuable, delivering the kind of work that I find enjoyable. So WTF, you can ask yourself that question, whether it's related to your coaching practice or to what it is that your athlete is doing. A bit of an antidote to that is this very simple traffic light model, which I like to use. If you notice that either yourself or your athlete is trying to avoid, control, or eliminate something in the short term, you can instead just notice that and then be open, get present, and do what matters. This is a simple evidence-based 3-step framework that offers perhaps a nice little antidote to that. If we're going to break that down very simply, you can experience these distracting thoughts and feelings in the short term, but you don't have to get hooked by them. You don't have to let them consume you altogether. You can then focus back onto your 5 senses, back onto the here and now, witness your thoughts, feelings, and actions as removed from oneself. And then finally, doing what matters. This is about essentially clarifying, you know, well, what kind of coach do I want to be? What kind of athlete do I want to be? What kind of potential do I want to realize ultimately? And then commit to the actions that will help to bring that to life for you. And I think kind of going through that quick little 3-step protocol will help you to interrupt that, that WTF process that we spoke about a moment ago. So that was the first one, WTF. We've ticked that off. Now let's go on to the next 2, which is Halt the Gremlin and the Support Manifest. And what I've done is I've kind of grouped these 2 together into another overarching heuristic, which will hopefully make them a little bit more memorable for you as well. Now let's talk a little bit about the stress response. Now this is where the workshop gets particularly enjoyable for me, because I'm going to get you guys to all engage in a name writing exercise. And for this to work, you will need a bit of pen and paper nearby, ideally. And we're going to see if we can experience a bit of a stress response as we go through this exercise, okay? So I'm hoping that you all have a piece of paper to hand with you. And I'm just going to pose a couple of different challenges to you. And to start with, just get that bit of pen and paper and write your full name for me. So first name and last name. Give you guys a couple of seconds to do that. So I've got Alison as my guide here. Alison is my guide here, and she's written her name at breakneck speed. I'm imagining that most of you have also managed to do that quite well. So let's try and make this exercise a little bit more difficult. But before we do that, Alison, if I just put you on the spot, on a scale of 0 to 10, what level of stress did you experience doing this task?
0.
0, even with all of the peer pressure of people watching you.
I know. I hate the
Very-
faces on the screen right now.
Very impressive. Okay, let's up the ante a little bit. Write your full name backwards, folks. So start with the last letter of your last name and write your whole name backwards. Alison is still performing quite quickly here, but nonetheless, there's some deliberate thought going in there, which is great. Okay, all done? Great, all right. Okay, so we've got 2 more conditions to go here, folks. So let's go again. Write your full name backwards, but this time use your non-dominant hand. Got some comments coming in here saying that my brain is playing tricks on me already. That's what I was hoping for. Just wait until you see the final condition, folks. Yeah, I need all night to do number 3. Yeah. Well, are you done? Are you done, Alison?
I mean, it's something.
Okay, okay. Okay, so now if I was going to ask you, Alison, how would you say that you performed in that latest condition? What would you say?
2 out of 10, 3 out of 10.
Okay, what about your stress response?
My palms are definitely sweaty.
Oh, just you wait till we see this next one. So now, before I reveal what this final condition is going to be, folks, what I really want you to notice is that when I read out the instructions for this final condition, I want you to deliberately pay attention to how your mind reacts to it, because that is the stress response, okay? Now, what I'm going to ask you to do for the final condition is to write your full name backwards using your non-dominant hand while singing happy birthday. And to do this, I also need you to put your camera on and ideally tilt the camera down so that we can see what sort of writing job you produce with your non-dominant hand. And then just to add to the stress a little bit, there's going to be a 15-second time limit. And if you're last, you must continue singing happy birthday on your own.
Now, am I gonna be the only one that everyone can hear?
I'll join in so that it's not
Okay.
terribly awkward, okay? So I see we've got a couple of people putting their cameras on. Sorry, no to the camera. That's fine. If you don't want to do it, that's absolutely fine. But it's really just to illustrate a point. So let's just give it a go. 3, 2, 1.
Happy birthday to you.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Chris, Allison. Happy birthday to you. Well, I've not even really managed to do the end of my last name here backwards. So I would really be the one who's going to continue writing and singing on my own at this rate.
Yeah, do you want? Come on. After 2 years, you asked for something.
Yeah.
I know you for more than 2 years. Yeah.
No,
More than 2 years.
you have
So
not. Oh, these
thank
are
you.
good.
Thank you very much, everyone, for
Yeah, healthy sugar.
trying that out. What I was
I have healthy chocolate if you want. Healthy
What I-
chocolate.
Count of one.
These are really, really good.
Do you eat this?
There we go. Okay, thank you everyone for being willing to try that. And for letting me awkwardly put you on the spot there. But hopefully what you noticed is that there was a bit of a spectrum of stress responses going on there. Okay, so maybe when I asked you just to write your name, there were no sweaty palms to start with. You were in your comfort zone, things we know and things we're good at. Then maybe getting to the territory of writing your name backwards or using your non-dominant hand, we were into the stretch zone. And then I'm kind of hoping that maybe pushed you into that panic zone a little bit in the fourth condition. Certainly, I did this workshop a few days ago and people were turning red, etc. Now, that is basically just illustrating to us that there are different types of stress responses, okay? Now, what I want us to do here, this is maybe something for you guys to do, is to jump on the chat box, or if you wish to, jump on the microphone as well. I've got a couple of different sets of words on the screen here. Distressed, panicked, and threatened on the left-hand side, and then we've got eustressed, stretched, and challenged on the right-hand side. Has anyone got any reflections on how you would describe the set of words on the left versus the set of words on the right? What do you think?
I guess on the left side, it's kind of stressful and threatening. And then on the right side, it's sort of more motivating and problem solving.
Yeah, okay. So potentially a bit more of like a negative interpretation on the left and then a sort of slightly more positive interpretation on the right. Yeah, absolutely. Any other reflections on that? How could we, what kind of observations are we making about the words on the left and the right here? Maybe to prompt a little bit more reflection, I've just got another set of questions here, which is for yourselves. Maybe think of a time when you were under pressure, but you rose to the occasion. And then also think of a time where you were under pressure, but it got the better of you. Now, well, we've got a couple of comments in the chat box there. What have we got? What have we got, Allison?
Set of words on the left extends beyond the window of tolerance for the athlete client.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Shit hitting the fan versus can manage.
Yeah, I like it.
And then we've got positive versus negative, growth mindset on the right, left more negative.
Wonderful. Yeah. Great. And I'm willing to bet as well that I'll just admit that that's okay. I'm also willing to probably hazard a guess that thinking of these times when you were under pressure, but you rose to the occasion versus it got the better of you, maybe these are the ways that you would describe the differences between those two scenarios. Maybe you were a little bit stressed in both scenarios, but the experience you were having was profoundly different in condition 1 versus condition 2. So really what we're talking about here is that there are, while we can have a stress response, there's kind of two different ways that it can go, really. And if we look at the science and the evidence behind it, there's a lot of research to indicate that the way our body responds from a hormonal point of view, from a cardiovascular point of view, a physiological point of view, is very different when we're in this kind of red stress response versus a green stress response. Now, the terms we use in the academic world to describe this is the red one on the left here, the more negative stress experience, is what we would call a threat state. And then the green set of words on the right is what we would call a challenge state. This is a more positive stress state. So if we're going to ask ourselves, is stress in sport bad? Well, sport has many stressors. It's unavoidable due to its nature. The nature of competition is stressful. Anyone who works in sport will know that because of the organizational...
Did you get any chocolate or not?
No,
Come on. Come on.
For those who work in sport, you will all experience that there are organizational challenges and stressors that come with being in sport. And there's also the personal stress that comes with competing in sport because of basically the demands that sport places on us, whether we're coaches or athletes. But crucially, depending on how we appraise and cope with these stressors, they can have positive or negative impacts on us from a physical, psychological, behavioral level. They do pose the risk of negatively influencing our performance, our health, and our satisfaction with sport, especially if we don't cope with them adaptively. Now, I'm just going to go through this real fast. I'm not going to linger on the academic evidence too long. But basically, if we are able to get into that positive challenge stress state, there's quite a lot of evidence to show that this results in positive outcomes for athletes and for coaches, right? So it's associated with more positive emotions, task-oriented coping, more performance satisfaction. People tend to be more determined, motivated. They have higher perceptions of control. The interesting thing here as well is that people who experience challenge appraisals or challenge stress experiences on a more regular basis, they tend to go into this state, this mindset, which is called a stress is enhancing mindset, which is just this kind of default belief that, you know what, when I experience stress, it's actually a good thing for my performance, right? And I'm sure most of you coaches out there will recognize that if we want to perform well, we actually do need to be a little bit stressed. We want to be a little bit energized, have that little bit of fight or flight response. And really, it's going to have that positive challenge outcome if we have this stress is enhancing outlook on it. It generally is associated with more enhanced well-being, higher levels of performance. And we also find that people who have more challenge appraisals, they tend to have a higher level of perceived goal attainment, regardless of, you know, what their actual level of achievement is in sport, which is interesting. Then the inverse of that, when people experience these negative threat appraisals, they tend to experience more negative emotions, they get more distracted, they tend to use more disengaged forms of coping with stress. There's decreased levels of satisfaction. They tend to burn out, overtrain, show lower levels of performance. And they also can develop the inverse of that mindset, which is that whenever stress strikes, they tend to see it as something that's awful and negative. It can also result in a range of different things that you can see on the screen here. So lower levels of perceived goal attainment, negative emotions, poor mental well-being, that sort of thing. So from a practical point of view, how can we leverage the stress response as coaches? How can we be a good stress co-pilot? So you remember how I said we've got two more of these coaching heuristics to get through. What I've done is I've actually combined these two final heuristics, Halt the Gremlin and the support manifesto. I've kind of combined them into this one image on the screen here, which I'll go through in different parts. So I'm hoping you guys can pay attention to the cartoon that I've pasted together on the screen here and notice the different parts that are going on in this scene here. So we've got two pilots sitting in a cockpit of a Boeing, a large airplane. And we might say that the main pilot on the left is the athlete and the other co-pilot on the right is the coach. And if you look at the cockpit, you might notice that there are some levers down by the pilot's arms. And you might notice that one lever is called demands and the other one is called resources. You might notice the seat that you as the coach are sitting in. You've actually got a little bit of paper in front of you, and that is a manifest. what we call the support manifest. And then we've got two other objects that are kind of in the cockpit. The main pilot, the athlete, has got a drink of water to keep themselves hydrated. And we've also got another little creature on the right-hand side there. Alison, do you want to hazard a guess at what that creature is?
A gremlin?
It's a gremlin, that's right. So how can we leverage the stress response? Well, both pilots should first learn how the plane works, practice flying propeller planes before passenger jets, halt the gremlin, check the support manifest, and then once landed, fill out the flight report. So let's go through these 5 different steps for how you can leverage the stress response. So just highlighting the relevant bits there. So number 1, both pilots should learn how the plane works. And this really can be summarized in this idea of awareness enables choice, okay? If both athlete and coach understand how the stress response works, this empowers them to act in ways that make challenge states more likely. If we understand that there are certain things that are going to tip us into a threat state versus a challenge state, that empowers us to maybe do things that are going to make a challenge state more likely to happen. And so this empowers us to do things like coping with stressful tasks when they come up. I've highlighted the word cope in green because the evidence generally suggests that if we put our focus and attention into trying to solve problems when they show up, or when we try and cope with the demands of a task or a situation, that usually results in more positive outcomes. So it empowers us to maybe prioritize doing that rather than just managing the emotions that arise from stress. I've put that in an amber color because, again, the evidence suggests that, for example, if we find that we're stressed and we just prioritize dealing with the anxiety or the nerves that arise from that stress, it can have positive impacts, but it can also sometimes have negative impacts. And then crucially, we will know to not avoid stressful situations. And I put that in red because the evidence suggests that if that is our go-to way of coping with a stressful situation, it's generally not going to result in a good outcome for us. Number 2, practice flying propeller planes before passenger jets. I hope that any pilot who is fully qualified has done that. They probably started in a small propeller plane before they eventually start flying large passenger Boeing jets. And the idea really here is about that lever that you saw in the middle of the cockpit, okay, the demands lever. And the crucial thing to understand about the stress response is that the demands that we place on athletes or on ourselves in any kind of pressure situation can either be increased or they can be decreased. And the optimal level of a demand, if you can find that optimal level, can build resilience and encourage a challenge state. So you might remember a few slides ago, I spoke a little bit about that comfort zone versus the panic and the stretch zone, right? So if you can get the demands that we place on performers right, then it can build that resilience and encourage a challenge state. So let's break that down a little bit more. Tactful exposure to stressors, for example, during practice, where you maybe make practice a little bit harder than it is normally, or easier, depending on who you're coaching, may actually help the athletes to be better prepared for the pressures of competition. And then regular and appropriately challenging competition experiences can help to build comfort and familiarity with those competition environments, right? I have, for example, worked with a lot of different athletes where they come to me and they say, you know, Chris, when I'm in a practice environment, I perform really well. I've got all of this data and I've got all of this evidence to show that I can execute the skills. I can produce these numbers in training and it all goes really well. But then I get into a competition environment and everything is different. And it obviously varies from individual to individual, but I often find that it's just because they might not be very experienced with a competition environment. The stressors and the novel nature of the competition environment is just, it places too much of a demand on them. So sometimes finding appropriately challenging competition experiences can help to build up that experience for them, and they can become more comfortable and familiar with the stress of competition, and that therefore decreases the demand that places on them. So I'm hoping you can see that as the coach, you can do things to increase or decrease the demands that you place on your athletes. Now, I'm wondering, maybe you can use the chat box to actually have a think about that. You know, how can you as the coach increase or decrease the demands that you place on your athletes? For example, in practice, I've heard of coaches who do things like they make the drills or the activities in coaching harder than they might normally be. So that increases the demands placed on the athletes a bit. They might also sometimes do things like introduce some consequences, where there's maybe like a light-hearted forfeit or something like that at the end of a practice session if one team underperforms versus another. Maybe just have a little bit of a think in the chat box, type in some ideas there. How do you think you can increase or decrease the demands that you place on your athletes so that you can put them into that stretch zone, that challenge state? And obviously I've put some asterisks next to the word optimal, tactful, and appropriate, because obviously this will vary massively depending on the athletes in front of you. If you tend to coach athletes who are new to the sport, who are beginners, or people who do not feel they have a lot of support available to them, obviously it would be inappropriate to place stress on those individuals, and you might need to support them a little bit more. You want to just lower that demand lever with those people. Whereas if you have performers who are very experienced and actually they want to be challenged at a higher level of competition, you can increase that demand lever by doing some of the things we spoke about a moment ago. So, Alison, what sort of things have we got in the chat box? How people can increase or decrease the demands?
So Judy says shorter time frame to make decisions and execute.
Yeah, exactly that. That's a great example. And we're going to put people into breakout rooms in due course so that you can share some ideas, and we'll hopefully hear a few more. Got another one?
Simulate the feeling. I coach swimming. My swimmers this weekend are swimming 100-meter butterfly. Practice this morning was descending pace sets of 6 times 25 fly to stimulate. Oh, lots of people talking. To stimulate that tired feeling of the last 1 or 2 25s.
Brilliant. So these are good examples of how you can increase the demands, and it doesn't have to be big things. It can sometimes just be small things like, you know, we heard there, stimulating fatigue, or simple things like that can either be used to increase or decrease the demands you place on the athlete. Let's move on to Halt the Gremlin. Now, there were some nice little animations I had here. I think they'll still work, actually. So, Halt the Gremlin, this is one of my favorite heuristics, and this is, again, talking about that demand lever, okay? I'm hoping that you've all seen the movie, Gremlins. If you haven't, this is a great excuse to go and watch the movie, because, and actually, whenever I work with athletes, I encourage them to go and watch the movie, because then this principle sticks in their mind much, much more clearly as well. But I tend to look at it this way. A gremlin is a demand that can usually, unfortunately, tip us into a threat state. And I would generally advise people to try and reduce these. However, like we said on the previous slide, depending on the individual you're working with, maybe you want to increase the demands during practice if you want to develop that resiliency and maybe get people more tolerant to dealing with stress. But really, this is about proactive anticipation of the uncertainties or the dangers that might show up in a sport environment, or the level of effort that will be required in a performance environment, okay? So it's really around this idea of better the devil you know than the devil you don't. You can ask yourself, you can, as the coach, or you can get your athletes to reflect on this prior to a performance. What do you think might be some of the likely gremlins that are going to show up at this event for you? Do you tend to get nervous at the start of a race? Well, that's a gremlin. Why don't you anticipate that that is going to show up before the event starts? Because then it's a devil you know rather than the devil you don't. Okay. Now, there's a couple of different gremlins that increase the demands and are more likely to put us into a threat state. So these are things to look out for, things to avoid, particularly in competition settings, okay? So the acronym to help you remember that is HALT, don't let the gremlin get wet. And that is, let's see, get the animation going. You might have heard of this before. Hungry, angry, lonely, tired, and no one likes being wet. Now, for those of you who've seen the movie, you'll probably remember that you should never get a gremlin wet, because if you get a gremlin wet, they tend to multiply and all chaos and all hell breaks loose. So I'm sure you might have seen this before, either in yourselves or the athletes that you work with, but when people start to get hungry, angry, lonely, or tired, these are things that will tip them into that threat state. And actually, if you can keep people well fed, you can keep them emotionally in a balanced sort of state. You make sure that they feel supported and not lonely, make sure they're well rested. And, hopefully if people are dry, get them dried off, get them warm, get them a little bit happier from that point of view. these are little protective things you can do to just pull those demands back down and keep them in a challenge state rather than a threat state. Okay, I'm just conscious of time. So then the second last step of that pilot cockpit metaphor and our final heuristic for this evening is the support manifest, okay? Now, you might remember in the cockpit, there were two levers. There was the demands lever, which we just spoke about, and then the next one was the resources lever. So why have we got this in here? The support manifest. One avenue to achieving challenge appraisals and psychological safety in teams is to provide less harmful support and more effective support. Now, that might seem pretty obvious to us on the surface. However, evidence indicates that this is quite hard for us to do. This is actually the topic that I did my PhD on, was trying to understand why is it that with the best of intentions, sometimes we as coaches might give really well-intentioned support, but it just lands in an unfortunate way that actually maybe stresses the athlete out more unintentionally, for example. So it's quite hard to provide the support that someone needs. And that's actually highlighted by the fact that there's a bit of a paradox between the support that someone receives versus the support that they think is available to them if needed, okay? So we tend to find, if we do the research on this, that there's actually more benefits associated with making athletes know that there is support available if they need it, rather than them actually getting that support. And that's because when we give help and support to people, there is the slight risk that we say the wrong thing at the wrong time to the wrong person. And then that might sometimes cause the support we give them to backfire unintentionally. So I came up with this little acronym, the support manifest, which focuses on the 5 W's of support so that we can hopefully give more effective support and less harmful support. And the reason I'm mentioning this is because effective social support as a coach is really important for stress coping. It can really be used to increase or decrease that resources that we have when we're in a stressful performance-related situation, okay? If you want to increase the resources that an athlete has available to them so that they feel less threatened when they enter more of that challenge state that we spoke about earlier, you can hopefully provide more support to them that's more effective by using this acronym, okay? So simple things like asking ourselves, okay, well, what support does this athlete need right now in this moment? Sometimes it might be nothing. And I think sometimes as coaches, especially if we're in a pressurized setting and we're the only one there who the athlete has available to support them, we might feel pressured to say something or give them something in the heat of the moment. But sometimes it might be that what the individual needs is no support at all. They might just need silence. It depends on the individual, obviously, but kind of asking ourselves, what does this person really need ideally in this situation? If you're not sure on what your athlete needs at a certain time, you can do a little exercise that I call support contracting, which is where you sit down with the athlete and you ask them, you know, when you're under pressure and shit's really hitting the fan, what do you want from me? What kind of support do you want from me in those moments? And you can contract that out with them, actually. When is the best time to give this particular form of support? Is it immediately before the performance is due to start? Is it when they're warming up? Maybe some athletes would like that. Other athletes might find that really irritating. For some of those other athletes, the best time to give them that support might be afterwards, or maybe even a day or two afterwards to do that debrief with them or whatever it is. Where is the best place for the support to take place? The example that I often use here is for coaches who are in the challenging dynamic environment of a team sport. If one athlete is doing something technically that could be corrected and could be done better, it might be better to provide them with that technical instruction when they are away from the rest of the group rather than in front of the rest of the group, for example. Again, it depends entirely on the individual. This really just relates to that point of there's a time and a place where the same message can have a much bigger impact depending on where you say it. Who is an interesting one, and this was also something that was highlighted in our research, that sometimes you might not be the best placed person to give the support or that key message that you need to get across to the athlete. Maybe that same piece of advice will carry more momentum and impact if it comes from a teammate or from a parent or from another coach. I'm sure you guys will have noticed this frustrating phenomenon where you might say the same thing to an athlete repeatedly, and they don't necessarily respond to it. And then a different person says the exact same thing to that athlete, and they're like, oh yeah, makes so much sense. It's really profound. And then you're like, I've been saying that to you for months on end. Why is it that the other person has said it, that it's resonating with you? So what, when, where, who is best placed to give that support? But then the really important one is why. Okay, why are we needing to give the support to the individual? Sometimes we might want to ask ourselves, okay, well, do I want to say something to this athlete now because they need it, or because I feel like I need to say something to the athlete to make myself feel better? Like I said before, I've had this scenario with coaches where you go to an event with an athlete, you're the only person there supporting that individual. You might feel like it's my job, it's my duty to say something and support this athlete, but you know, is that for you or is that for the athlete that you're doing that in that situation? It's sometimes worth reflecting on, why do I want to give this support? Is this what they need? Okay, and then the very last thing, once you've landed the plane, fill out the flight report. And this is really just about reflecting and debriefing, okay? Once the plane has landed, establish the facts of what happened. And this is because adversity and stress is experienced regularly in both sport and life. And research indicates that if we can review and reflect on those challenging experiences, this helps athletes to process them more quickly, extract lessons, and develop their resilience. A very simple reflective framework that is used across a range of different domains is Rolf's cycle. What happened? So what does this mean about my capabilities? What now? What is the next step that I need to take? And you can reinforce the value to your athletes of what can be acquired through challenging practice and competition experiences, okay? And this is kind of highlighting to them that if they have a very challenging competition experience, yes, it might have been challenging, it might have stretched them, or maybe even pushed them into that panic zone a little bit. But if you deliberately take that time to fill out the flight report, reflect on what happened, what kind of strengths can they extract from it moving forward, that can help them to develop resilience, become more familiar with those competition environments, and again, make those challenge states in future much more likely. So that's really it, guys. To finish, I'm going to put you guys very briefly into some breakout rooms, or you can just type it into the, I think we'll go with breakout rooms probably. Yeah.
Whatever you like, we can do.
Just to reflect on it really, how could you use these heuristics in your own coaching practice? You know, I don't think heuristics need to be used prescriptively. We've spoken about WTF, what's the function? We've spoken about halt the gremlin, which is where you can alter the demands placed on an individual. And we've spoken about the support manifest, which is how you can alter the resources that are available to someone. And remember that we kind of summarized number 2 and 3 using that cockpit metaphor in the airplane. So we're going to put you guys into some breakout groups, 3 to 4 participants per room. And I'd just be keen for you guys maybe to share some ideas. Which of these heuristics resonated with you the most? Which ones would you actually be interested or excited about applying into your own coaching practice? We good to go, Alison?
Yep.
Okay, we'll give you guys, how many minutes do you reckon? 5 minutes, yeah.
3 minutes to 5 minutes. Yeah.
Sure.
Okay. There we go.
I'm going to jump onto another session, but thank you very much for all the information. That was really beneficial.
We've got everyone back. Now, no, it was a very brief discussion in your breakout rooms, folks, but that's really it for tonight. I'm hoping that what we can do is just to finish off with, if you can just jump on the chat box and maybe type in there, what is your key takeaway from this evening, or what is one key action that you're excited to try and implement in your coaching practice as a result of tonight? And I'm conscious of time, and I appreciate some of you probably need to get going, but I'll still hang around here for a couple of minutes. If anyone has any questions and they want to jump on the microphone, I'd be very happy to answer them. Max's key takeaway is gremlins, which I very much like. What's the function seeing what's under the surface of the iceberg? Thank you. Wonderful. Great. I should also say, for those of you who are interested, I post all sorts of heuristics and little infographics and useful, playful concepts on my social media channels, which is flowstates_official on Instagram and TikTok, and I'm sure you'll be able to get those details of my handles. I think that was already shared on Instagram, actually.
Yeah,
Deal.
I'll send out the slides and everything, and I'll include it in there too.
Great. Well, thank you all very much for your participation. Very much enjoyed that, and I'll hand back over to Alison to finish.
Yeah, I'll just second the thank you for attending, everyone. We will send out the slides, and we have this session recorded. If you'd like to reflect on some of the content, go back to it, which I definitely will. Our next Podium Performance session will be February 28th. And also tickets to the Atlantic Coaches Conference are going to be opening up next week. That will be early bird pricing. And if you're a VIP coach, you get 50% off. So watch for that on our social media and through our newsletters. Sahid, is there a link for the next event? I will send one out when I send you the slides. How about that? Excellent. Thank you so much for being here. That was awesome.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
If anyone has any questions, feel free to stay on. We'll stay on for a minute.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.